going to assume that's on. Good morning, everybody. Good to see everybody. Go ahead and open up your Bibles to Exodus chapter 19. Exodus 19 is where we're at this morning. All right. Can somebody tell me what's going on with Israel? What we've talked about the last couple chapters here. Where are they at? They in Egypt, out of Egypt? They're out of the wilderness of Sinai, out of Egypt. What did we talk about on Wednesday night in chapter 18? Who came and saw Moses? His father-in-law, Jethro. And who was with Jethro, his father-in-law? His wife and his sons, right? Moses' wife and sons. Yeah, not Jethro's, yeah. Moses' wife and sons were with him. So Jethro was bringing back Moses' family to him. And what advice did Jethro give to Moses? He noticed some things that was going on. What was going on with Moses and the people? Can't do it all on your own, right? How many people are there with Moses, roughly? About 2 million people, right, is a pretty good estimate. And what are they all doing with their problems? Going to Moses. Right, I have 2 kids, 2, and if they come to me throughout the day with their problems, how am I usually by the end of the day? Right? And I got a wife too, yeah. Which is great and wonderful, Jen. You're trying to get me in trouble because she's back there teaching. Right, and now imagine 2 million people constantly coming up to you and complaining to you and bringing all their issues to you. So what's the advice that Jethro gives him? You need some help, right? He says, you need help. You can't do this all on your own. Why? What's the reason Jethro gives? He gives a very good reason. What was that reason that we talked about? It's going to bring you down. It's going to wear you out, right? I'm sure Jethro could probably already see it on Moses and in their conversation that this is wearing you down. If you keep doing this, you're going to burn out, and you're no good to anybody then. And what's the thing, though, Jethro says? He says, here's my advice, but what? You should do something, though, before you take my advice. Verse 19. Go to the Lord. Go to God. Right? He says, here's my advice, but go to God. Okay? Just a quick point. If you're ever going to give somebody advice, what's probably one of the best things to do when you're giving them advice? Pray. Go to God, right? Go to His Word. Pray to Him. Read His Bible, right? Figure things out, right? Here's my advice. Here's what I think you should do. But make sure it's in line with God first, right? And Moses does that, and what does God say? Yeah, that's a very good thing. Listen to Him. And so Moses does, and he sets people up over, it says thousands, hundreds, 50s, tens, right? They break it down, kind of like a court system like we have today. And only the major issues then will come to Moses, right? He says, let the people figure it out, and then the really big ones, they'll come to you, and you'll come to me, and we'll get this all figured out. All right, so that brings us up into 19. Before we jump into 19, 18 kind of wraps up kind of the first section of Exodus. If you were to break Exodus up into sections, I know some people like to break up books into different sections. Chapter 1 through 18 is kind of the first section. And that's the section about redemption, right? God hears Israel crying in Egypt. He hears their pleas. He sends Moses as the Redeemer to bring them out of Egypt. And now they're out of Egypt. And then we're going to jump into the second section here, which is chapters 19 through roughly 24. And that's the covenant. Right? God is now going to establish His covenant with the people of Israel. And we're going to see here very quickly, right, at Mount Sinai is where they're going to take place. They're going to figure this all out. God says, okay, if you're going to be my people, then you're going to need to do these things. And then chapters 25 through 40, He sets up worship. Okay, now that you're my people, we're in this covenant relationship. Here's how you're going to worship me and obey me. And we're going to talk about things like the tabernacle and things like that. Any questions on that as we move forward, or even about chapter 18 from Wednesday night? Excellent. All right, so let's jump into chapter 19. If somebody could read verses 1 through 8. Okay. How long have they been out of Egypt at this point? Right, depending on your translation. What does your translation say, Juan? It said in exactly 2 months, right? The King James says in the 3rd month. Okay? So roughly about 2 to 3 months they've been out of Israel, or out of Egypt, excuse me. They come out of Egypt. They're now in the wilderness of Sinai, and Moses goes up to the mountain because God called him up there. God says, come here, Moses. And what is the first thing he tells Moses there in verse 4? He says, you're going to tell the children of Israel this. What's the first thing you're going to tell them? Yeah, right. Remind them of what I just did, right? Look what I did to the Egyptians, okay? And what was one of the things, if you remember back when the plagues and the strifes were going on, what was the reason God was doing that? To show the world, right? To show the Egyptians, show Israel, show all the nations around that area and the world, I am greater than all these other, quote, gods, right? I am Yahweh. I am the true God. Exactly, right? And we shouldn't be surprised later, right, as you go along in Israel's journey, that other nations are saying, hey, we know what happened in Egypt, right? Why? Because that was the point, right, was to make sure that everybody that knows who God Yahweh is. And he says, remind them of what I did to the Egyptians and how I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you unto myself, right? So what is he saying there when he says that? What do you think that means? Anybody? Yeah, exactly. No, that's exactly what it is, right? It's so easy for us to forget, right? And it's easy for Israel to forget of who really did all this, right? It wasn't Moses, it wasn't Aaron, it wasn't the elders, right? They were the instruments that God used to take them on this ride, right? That's a very good example, right? It's just like riding on the back of an eagle, right? What do you do if you're flying on the back of an eagle? Are you flying? No, you're not, right? You're just hanging out, right? You're holding on, yeah. You're holding on, you're just going wherever it takes you. And that's exactly what God did with Israel. With his power, with his might, he brought them out of Egypt. They didn't have to do anything. All they had to do was just follow and do what he tells them to do, and God will take care of the rest. Any thoughts on that? All right, let's look at verses 5 and 6, this kind of if-then statement. What's the if, first off, in verse 5? If you obey and you keep my covenant, okay? So is there a responsibility on Israel's part here for this covenant? Yes. It's conditional, right? This isn't a, hey, I'm taking you as my people, and I'm just going to give you all these things no matter what you do. No, God says, if you obey and if you listen, then what? You'll be my special treasure, for all the earth is mine. You will be known to me as a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. Does that sound familiar to anybody? Yeah, 1 Peter chapter 2. Go ahead and turn over there. This is one of those easy ones that you can every once in a while see in the Old Testament and go, hey, I know this one, right? You don't have to do too much digging. Somebody read 1 Peter chapter 2 and read verses 1 through 8. Actually, 1 through 9, yeah. 1 Peter 2, verses 1 through 9. right, perfect. Thank you very much. Okay. So in Exodus, we have our if-then statement. If you obey my words, if you listen to my voice, then you will be a peculiar treasure, a holy priesthood, a kingdom of priests. What's the if-then statement here in 1 Peter chapter 2? Yeah, if, right? And so in verse 3 we have, if you have tasted that the Lord is gracious. And then in verse 6, right, if you believe, right, on him, you will not be confounded, right? If you do these things, if you are following Jesus, then what are we? A chosen people, a royal priesthood, right? Right, a royal priesthood, a chosen generation, a holy nation. So in Exodus, who is the holy nation? Israel. In 1 Peter chapter 2, who's the holy nation? The church, right? God's people, okay? Is that relegated to one physical nation? No, it's anybody who wants to be a part of God's people can be a part of God's people. And just as God saw Israel as separate from the world, God now sees everyone who calls upon his son's name separate from the world. Any thoughts, questions on this idea that we get here in Exodus?
It's interesting, the terminologies that he said there. He said that I brought you out on wings of eagles to me, to myself. Here he's saying, I called you out of the darkness into his marvelous light. There's this idea that they were in darkness while they were in Egypt. Now they're coming to him, and in him there's light.
Yep.
And he said that you're a special possession, but the earth is mine. Here we're a people that he owns, possession, and it comes from all the earth, not just one nation. It people of all the earth, but now anybody can come. But it's if you accept the conditions.
Exactly, right? And that's the thing, that's the big point right there, right? It's if you accept these conditions, right? No matter where they are in Exodus or here in 1 Peter chapter 2, right? There are some conditions that have to be met, right? And I think that's a very important point we have to realize is a lot of people almost like to say like, well, if I believe, then I'm good, right? I can do whatever I want. We kind of had this discussion a little bit on Thursday night in our Bible study was, right? Just because, right, I say I'm a Christian, am I really a Christian? Right? Well, no, there's certain conditions that have to be met, right? Just same here with Israel. If you listen to my words, then you will be these things. All right, any other thoughts on these first 8 verses? Adam? Yeah, and in verse 5 there, it depends on, I don't know if any other translation have this, but in the New King James it says, if you obey my voice indeed, right? And that indeed means wholeheartedly, truly, right? So if you're truly listening, if you're truly obeying, then these things, right? There's a problem with Israel that we see, and it's also in our lives too, not only just like Adam was saying, where we just kind of listen and, like to talk over God, I guess, for lack of a better term, but also the point where we go, oh yeah, I'm obeying because I'm just doing the actions, right? And that's the problem with Israel. They get down the line is they just get wrapped up in the actions, and then their heart, though, is with Baal, with Asherah, with whatever. And God even says, they honor me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. And here in Exodus, when God says, if you obey my voice indeed, what he's saying there, it's not only just doing the right things, but doing them with the right attitude, with the right mindset, with the right heart. And that's the same for us today. Any other thoughts?
In 1 Peter 2, verse 9, I think it's interesting that he says, okay, you are a chosen race, you're a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people for his own possession. Those are things that harken back to what he said to his people coming out of Egypt. But he also says that you may proclaim his excellencies.
Yep.
There's a reason why he's done all these things. And if we're going to be a people of God, it's kind of like what James said, you know, faith without works is dead. If you're going to be my people, if you're not going to do what I want you to do, you're dead to me. You're going to be proclaiming my excellencies. The theme verse for this year, you know, we are a workmanship created for a purpose. And if you're not fulfilling the purpose, then
Yeah, exactly, right? God called you out for a purpose, right? You need to fulfill that purpose. Same with Israel. God pulled them out of Egypt. Why? To proclaim him to all the other nations, to prove that he is the one true God, right? Why did God send his son to die for us? So that we can then proclaim that he is the one true God who saves everybody, right? Very good point. All right, so Moses takes these words. Oh, Roger, go ahead. Yep. Yeah. Yep. Yeah, and we're going to see that, right, as like you said, as we go along here, is oftentimes we read and we think, and then this happened, and then this happened, and this happened, and we think, well, how could Israel do that, right? Like, literally just, last page, a.k.a. 5 minutes ago, is that, well, no, it's been, a couple of months. It's been, again, kind of, this whole time I've been reading Exodus, I think of a family car ride, right? If you've ever driven down to Florida with your kids, right, that's 6 hours. How much complaining is going on in that 6 to 10 hours? Not only from the kids, but from the parents too, right? 11 hours, right? It's a lot, right? It feels a lot longer than that. These people are journeying days, weeks, months, years, and we go, well, how could they complain, right? They're just on their feet. They're not in an air conditioning vehicle that's traveling 70 miles an hour. Well, yeah, they're going to complain because we complain, right? They're no different than we are. All right, so Moses takes the words to the people of Israel, and what did the elders of the people say? We'll do it, right? All right, we're all in on this. So they go ahead and make the promise. Let's go ahead now and read verses 9 through 17. Let's see kind of some commandments God wants here. Somebody could read verses 9 through 17 of Exodus 19. Perfect. Thank you. All right. So God tells Moses, this is what's going to happen. What's going to happen? Somebody explain to me the next few events that's going to happen here in these few days. How's God going to come down upon the mountain? In a thick cloud, right? A thick cloud's going to come down on the mountain. Something different. And God says, I'm going to speak to you, Moses. But what? Somebody else is going to be allowed to hear this conversation between Moses and God. The Israelites, right? This whole time, God's been talking to Moses, and as far as we understand, and as far as we can tell, it's only Moses and God that are talking to each other, right? They're talking back and forth. God's telling Moses what to do. Moses will then relay it to Aaron, and they'll go on. God says, though, I'm going to speak in a way, right, kind of out loud. We're going to have a one-on-one conversation, but everybody's going to be able to hear it. I'm going to come down this mountain. Everybody's going to hear what I tell you. Why? He gives a reason why in verse 9. It's a very interesting reason. Believe in who? In Moses. Interesting. Why do you think God says, I need to do this so the people will believe in you? Don't they already? I mean, they've already crossed the Red Sea with the guy, right? They've already put blood on their doorpost because Moses told them to. Why do you think that is?
History shows that they're going to not believe in him as the only source.
Yeah, right. Yeah, as we go along, we're going to see they're going to run into this exact issue of, oh, Moses, are you really the only one that can talk? Right, maybe you're just saying this to us, right? And I think that's a very good point, is God's realizing these people, just like we do today, sometimes need to be smacked in the face with evidence, no matter what it is, right? Whether it's spiritual things, physical things. A lot of times we have a saying, right? I need to hear it from the horse's mouth. Right? That's kind of what God's doing here. No more of this, well, God said, because I'm Moses, right? It's, no, I'm going to speak in a way that everybody hears, all 2 million plus of them, and they will know that you are the one I've chosen to lead them through this journey. Any other thoughts? Yeah, we're going to see that coming up, right, as we get into chapter 20. Eventually, the people of Israel are going to be like, all right, we're done. Right? We don't want to hear any more of this. You just, whatever you say, right? They get the message almost like, all right, you are the spokesman for God. We understand that. You just go talk. Tim. Yep. He'll always reveal his will. Yes, very much so, right? He'll make sure that we know, and we know where it's coming from. Yes, very good point. Okay, so how are the people... Yep. He does, yes. Yeah. Exactly, right? And I think what's interesting is, right, you see this, it's not just a, hey, I'm going to speak so everybody knows, but yeah, like you said, right, I'm going to set you apart from the people. People are going to come to the mountain. No one else can touch the mountain, but you're allowed to go up, not only touch the mountain, but you can go up into the mountain, into the cloud where I am, right? So everybody not only hears, but physically sees you're different from the rest of the people. Very good point. Yeah. Yeah. Yep, exactly. And when we get into chapter 20, we're going to talk about that a little bit, right? This idea of images of God and things like that. But yeah, it's very much right. You see a cloud, you see fire, but there's nothing really there for you to be like, oh, this is what God looks like, right? No, you don't know, right? You just saw a cloud and fire. Okay, so how are the people then to prepare, and how long is it supposed to take them to prepare? Somebody break that down. 3 days. All right, so what are they supposed to be doing for 3 days? Wash your clothes, sanctify yourselves. Husband and wives, don't do what husband and wives do, right? All these different things. why do you think that is? Why do you think God wants them to just, wash their clothes? Why would God want them to wash their clothes?
Get their minds and their hearts in line with what they're about to do. And that's to meet the Almighty.
Yeah, exactly, right? Again, this harkens back to the burning bush, right? When Moses approaches God in the burning bush, what's the first thing God tells him to do? Take off your shoes, because where you're standing is holy ground, right? It's to get that mindset of you are approaching the Creator. You don't just get to walk up to the Creator like you would walk up to anybody else. Your heart, your mind, everything needs to be in line. And if that means, hey, wash your clothes to help get your heart and mind right, then you wash your clothes to help get your heart and mind right. Again, right, as we look at it in our lives, it's this idea of the physical versus the spiritual, right? Physically, you can do things to help get your mind right for the spiritual things. What kind of things, for example, you're coming to church on Sunday morning. What kind of things can you do physically to get your mind right to worship God with your brothers and sisters? Remove the clutter. Yeah, right. Turn off the TV, get rid of all the noise.
Yeah, just set aside all of those things that preoccupy your mind with daily life. And get aware, and that's what he's telling them to feel. Set aside all of this other stuff.
Yeah.
That's secondary completely.
Exactly, right. And realize, too, and I think it's interesting, right, that we see, okay, wash your clothes, put a boundary around the mountain, right? Anybody that touches the mountain, you're going to shoot them, stone them, man or animal, right? It doesn't matter if your lamb just ends up grazing up onto the mountain, you kill it, right? Sorry. But I think it's interesting, too, that in verse, what verse is it there? When he talks about husbands and wives don't go to each other, all right? Verse 15, right? Again, why? That's a good thing, right? That's the thing God commanded husbands and wives to do all the way back in Genesis. But in verse 15 saying, just because it's a good thing doesn't mean it's the appropriate thing at this time, right? Again, it's the idea of getting your heart and mind, getting rid of everything else and realizing there's a more important relationship that you're about to enter than your marriage covenant that you did with your husband or wife, right? You're now entering into a covenant with the Creator, and you need to be realizing that. But what are some things, right? We can get rid of the clutter. What other things can we do to help prepare our minds when we worship God? What kind of things do you do? Read your Bible, right? Get ready, okay? Listen to songs, right? As you're coming into the church building in your car, or even as you're getting ready in the morning, right? You can type in YouTube. You can pray. One thing, me and Chanel we're talking about the Sabbath. We're getting ready to enter into Exodus 20. And we're talking about different things, and right, we're talking about how, well, right, the Sabbath isn't commanded for us today, but then Chanel brought up a very good point. She said, but there's still good on a Saturday, right, not making your Saturday so busy to where then come Sunday, you're dragging, right? Because, oh man, I had this, that, the other thing going on Saturday, right, because it's my one free day off of work, so I filled it all up and didn't get to bed till midnight, and then I have to get up at 6 in the morning, and come Sunday morning, I'm, right, bobbing my head, trying to stay awake, right? It's this idea of, realize, Sunday comes, we know when it comes, we know when the time is, right? Prepare yourself. Yes, Tim? Yep. It's special, yeah, just like this moment here in Sinai, God's saying, you prepare yourself. This is a special moment. God is still going to deal with Israel throughout their history, right? But this moment, he wants them realizing it is a very special, appropriate moment. See?
I think that there's an imagery here of the physical washing of your clothes and preparing with the baptism that we go through, how we wash ourselves and clothe ourselves with Christ. We wash our sins away, we clothe ourselves with Christ through baptism. That's a special coming to meet the Lord.
Yeah, exactly. And a very good point here, right, is he says, look at verse 11. Let's get into some imagery here. He says, and be ready against the third day, for on the third day I will come down in the sight of the people upon Mount Sinai. The third day, does that sound interesting to anybody else? That's the third day that God's going to show up to the people. What? Jesus was raised from the dead on the third day. Now, question. God's going to come down on the mountain if the people prepare themselves. On the third day, then God will come down. If the people are ready and prepared, then God will come down. When Jesus rose, did we have to do anything? Did we have to prepare ourselves for anything? No, he was raised on the third day regardless, right? God was bringing salvation to man, whatever state man is in. Now, does that mean then that we can just do whatever we want and still be okay with God and our covenant with him? No, we still have a covenant relationship with God, with Jesus, right? But I just kind of want to put that thought in your head. Again, this idea of the third day, okay? Kind of like we've talked about earlier. A lot of these numbers and days and stuff, God's not just doing things because, oh, right, this seems like a good idea. It's foreshadowing over and over again, kind of like when we talked about with the Passover in Jesus as well. Any other thoughts? Okay. All right, so if anybody touches the mountain, they die. Moses is allowed to come up. How does God come down on the mountain? Kind of just like a little haze, and that's good. How does he show up on the third day? A thick cloud. What else is there? Thunder, lightnings. It says a fire, right? And it's like the smoke of a fire. Was the mountain just kind of okay with all this? How is the mountain itself reacting to all this? Verse 18, end of verse 18. Yeah, it sounded the trumpet in verse 19, right? That's the voice of the trumpet sounded and got louder and louder. What was the mountain doing? It was shaking, right? So, again, imagine this. For 3 days now, you're preparing. The third day comes. You're ready. Your clothes are washed. All right, God's coming. Okay, this is going to be good, right? And then all of a sudden, right, you're in your house or whatever. Fire's going, lightning's going. The mountain starts shaking, right? So there's a great earthquake on the mountain. A sound of a trumpet, and it says it keeps getting louder and louder and louder. I guess, to wake up 2 million people, you got to kind of get kind of loud, right? How are you going to react to that? Are you just going to be like, hey, let's open the door and let's go? All the people tremble, right? And again, that's a very natural reaction to all this. How do we react when there's, I don't know if anybody out here knows what an earthquake is, but I grew up in California, right? And if the house shook a little bit, how does everybody react? Get in a doorway, get under your desk, because in school that was our drills. We had earthquake drills. They could stop nuclear bombs and earthquakes, apparently, getting under your desk, right? We have like a little earthquake and we all kind of freak out. How does everybody here react when we have a major storm come in and the lightning starts going and the wind starts blowing? Seek shelter, get in the bathroom, right? Hunker down. Now you have all this going together. You have a really loud noise going on outside. There's fire. Yeah, you're going to be scared, right? Again, the idea is God is trying to impress upon the people his power. Right? Again, realize he is the one who brought them out of Egypt. And what does Moses tell them? So they come out, and Moses, right, he tells them, get on out here. Let's go to the mountain. So they all go up into the mountain. Let's go ahead and let's look at what God tells them now. Verses 18 through 25. If somebody could read 18 through 25 there. All right, so we have this amazing scene, right? Moses goes up to the mountain like he's supposed to, and what does God say? Go back down. Yeah, right. But what does he tell him? He says, make sure what? Make sure nobody comes up here, right? Again, reiterating this command. Make sure the people are not going to do what I tell them not to do, because if they do, what's going to happen? They're going to die, right? Yeah, right. It says it gets louder and louder, right? And then Moses speaks, right? I don't know what Moses says there. He says something, and then God answers him and says, Moses, come up, right? I don't know if it's Moses just saying, hey, we're all here, right? We did a head count. I don't know, but he says something, whatever it was. Hey, and so God tells him, right, do this, and he says, and let the priests which come near sanctify themselves. And then what does Moses tell him in verse 23? Yeah, God, you told us not to do this. Why would Moses repeat to God what God's already told him? Is it because God forgot what he already said? Like we as parents do, Oh yeah, I told you you're going to do that. Why do you think that is? Yeah, right. I think that's really it. He understood how severe this was, right? Kind of like, when you discipline your children, or you get onto your children, do you ever look at them and say, now tell me what I just said? Did you ever do that? Oh, yeah. Whoever it is, yep. Yeah, I don't care if it's the priest, I don't care whoever, right? Because he knows, right? People, out of 2 million people, you're going to have at least one who's going to be like, I'm just going to go, right? I want to see. Again, like Adam said in his lesson this morning, right? Eventually somebody's going to have that seed of doubt of, did God really mean anyone touch the mountain? Yeah. Only certain people can touch the ark. Only certain people can do these things, right? And we're the exact same way. God says, you do this, you'll die. You do this, it's it. Well, did God really mean that? Yes, Adam and then Tim. Hope you're good. Yeah. Well, yeah, and I think you make a very good point, right? God wants people to be in his presence, right? I mean, go all the way back again to creation. He was with Adam and Eve, right? But then when sin enters in, there's like this separation, right? There's a part where we can't be in the presence of God anymore. And I think kind of your answer, too, could also be later when Moses says, show me your face, right? And God tells him what? I can't, because if I do, you'll what? You'll die, right? God understands, right? Whatever it is about him, if we are fully in his presence, in our state that we're in, we'll die. But what does he do, though? He puts him in the mountain, and he says, I'll show you my back. Yeah. Yep. Yep. A reality situation. Yeah. Yeah, exactly, right? And I think that's, again, right, like you said, God wants everybody to come to him, right? But there's always has to be certain conditions that have to be met, right? Even today, God wants to save the world, but he's not going to save those who don't want to be saved. And I think the same thing here is with Israel, right? He wants everybody to come to Mountain and meet with him, but for their lack of faith, their lack of whatever, right, God says, you can't. But I will do my best to accommodate however I can to make that happen, yes. Any other thoughts? Tim, you had a point.
That's what I'm saying. When God says something the very first time, and he says it to all of us to hear it. Everybody does that. We need to hear it the first time.
Yeah.
And I think what Moses realized is, as a leader, he could use his people. It's going to be that guy. Well, I didn't know.
Yeah. Exactly, right? And there's always going to be that person who says, well, you're right, he didn't hear, or maybe he was talking to that person, whatever. Yeah, Steve.
But he said, do not let the priest and the people break through. So there were priests in some function.
Yep.
And I can just, if I was the priest then, I would reason among myself and I'd say, they can't go up, but I'm a priest. I can go up.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the human condition. We always try to reason through and say, well, the rules don't apply to me.
Yep. I think it's interesting too, right? Originally, Moses goes up by himself. God says, go back down, reiterate to the people what I've told you, right? Because I think God realizes you're going to be here a little while, Moses, and right, we're going to see how they're going to react to Moses being up there a little while. But then he also says what? He says, Moses, go down, and then, oh yeah, by the way, bring who with you? Aaron. And I think that's interesting. I think that also shows Moses and Aaron's realization of God's commands. Because Moses and Aaron now, this whole time, they go everywhere together, right? All through Egypt, it's Moses and Aaron, Moses and Aaron, Moses and Aaron, right? They're going up the Pharaoh together, doing all these things. And God says, Aaron's with you to be your mouthpiece. But then when God says Moses comes up, what do they realize? Does Aaron go, but I go everywhere with him, right? So I'm going to go too. What do they realize? No. Moses comes up, right? Again, reiterating, Moses is the leader. Moses is the one in charge. Aaron's helping him. So then when God sends Moses back down the first time, he says, now bring Aaron with you. And then they go up together, right? Again, showing what he wanted to back in verse 9, that they believe in you and that you are the leader, right? Aaron's not the leader. Aaron and whoever else isn't the leader, you are the leader. Any other thoughts as we wrap up here before we jump into chapter 20 on Wednesday night? And that won't take us long. It's just the 10 Commandments. We'll breeze right through them on chapter 20. All right. Awesome. Well, thank you all very much. Appreciate you guys, and we'll see you all Monday.